Welcome to Business as Unusual. This is the live stream where we explore the pressing issues and emerging trends that are shaping the business landscape. We're going to start in just a few minutes, but if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then I'm going to try and get to all of them during today's session. I'm Kathy Steele, and for those of you that don't know, I am the CEO of Red Caffeine and host today. For those unfamiliar, joining us for the first time, Red Caffeine is a growth consultancy, and we build and execute go-to-market plans for ambitious mid-market organizations. Our service offering includes a fractional team that is led by a senior level marketing leader that enables a business to scale rapidly without hiring a wide range of full-time staff members. So Happy New Year, everyone. We are just days away from the inauguration. And as we are starting to think about navigating the beginning of the new administration, it just feels so appropriately timed to think about how these leadership changes will play a significant role in driving our economic and societal shifts. It's going to impact industries across the world. And we're going to be thinking about policy changes, evolving workforce dynamics, and really understanding how these factors fit into the broader picture. And it's going to just be more crucial than ever. But luckily, to help us make sense of it all, I'm thrilled to welcome Mark Parrott. He's a top Vistage speaker, best-selling author, and a true visionary. With over 1,000 presentations delivered to 20,000 plus CEOs, Mark is an expert in breaking down large-scale trends and turning them into actionable insights. Together today, we're going to explore how these meta trends influence business strategy, societal polarization, and even the health of your wealth in our next economy. So let's dive in. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. I'm so excited to have you here today. Can you tell our audience a little bit about you and maybe something that's not on your typical bio?
Not on my typical bio. I'm a bass player. So so I played, the last band I was in was an acoustic Allman Brothers band, and I play upright bass. So, and the last bass I had built was a 6'4" double bass made of tiger maple, and they stained hot rod flames on it. Like the coolest thing ever. Yeah. In fact, when I first got it, there's kind of a safe place in the world of Vistage or the private middle markets. There's a few safe spaces for the leaders. One of them is like a Vistage meeting or a peer advisory board meeting. And I just had the thing built, had it strung it, plucked it once, took a picture of it, jumped in the car and drove to Pennsylvania. And one of the safe places where you can show off an extravagant gift to yourself that either your spouse doesn't find out about or your employees don't, so no one asks you for raises, is at a Vistage meeting. So I'm showing the bass to the first guy, and the guy goes, "Wow, you got to show that to Christian Martin." Now, I don't know if you know who Christian Martin is, but he's Christian Martin the Sixth. At the time he was the leader of Christian Martin Guitars, which is considered the American Stradivarius. The two guitarists in my band were both playing combined value Martin guitars was $20,000. So so I'm sitting back, I look at the first guy and I go, yeah, I'll show it to Christian Martin. Like next time I'm hanging out with him, like what, like an odd reference, I'll show it to Eric Clapton too when I'm hanging out with him. It was weird, right? So the second guy leans over his shoulder and goes, "No, you got to show it to Christian Martin." I go, "What gives?" He goes, "Right there. This was Christian Martin's Vistage group." He walks up to me at the end of the presentation and he goes, "Are you into barter?" I said, "I'm not into barter for anyone but you. What do you got?" So he said, "How about you come to Nazareth, Pennsylvania, teach what you have to teach to my C-levels, and I'll make you a guitar." So I said, "Okie dokie."
Sure, right?
I think I was standing on the accelerator driving back. It went awesome. The whole presentation went great. And what it was, he recognized he had to pivot. This is a while back, but what happened is that the key demographic were Caucasian 48-year-old males. And the number of people turning 48 years old for Caucasian males was decreasing for 14 straight years. The same dynamic negatively affecting Harley Davidson. And he realized he had to pivot. So we came up with all sorts of cool pivot strategies that they're still utilizing today. But he comes up to me at the end of the presentation. He's like, you got like an hour? I said, "Dude, for you, I got an hour. I got 15 musicians waiting for me to call them after I leave this facility." And so he ended up taking me on a personal tour of the entire facility, and we discussed all sorts of pivot strategies about how he was going to keep Martin Guitars relevant when the key demographic was decreasing for 14 years in the United States. So were there other countries? Were there other instruments? All sorts of things. It was really fascinating to go down the rabbit hole. In fact, one of the most fascinating things was this. I think you, Kathy, would probably be exposed to this too on a regular basis. I said to him at one point, I said, after the presentation and the tour, I said to him, I got to ask you, why am I here? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, every single demographic thing that you were asking, that anyone was asking in the room, you knew the answer to, except for two. He didn't know the demographics for entry-level guitar out of Mexico called a Mexican Martin. I said, and he didn't know the demographics of Japan. That's two things. So the deal was like, okay, I filled in a little bit of value for you, but why am I here? He said, you're here because you drew the same conclusions and you're not me. He said,
Mhm.
the leader of a private middle market company is like being the parent of a wayward teenage son. That after a while, your voice kind of falls on deaf ears, like, what? He said, you're here because you're not me. And you took a while to get here. And for some reason, the message resonates differently, even though it might be the exact same wording, exact same person, because coming from a different voice, we hear it differently. And that's one of the things that actually brings up a whole combination of tools we can use to predict the future more accurately, utilizing the science of human nature. So picture the it's human nature to want to do what everybody else is doing. And the reason why that works is if you study human behavior through the lens or the anachronism that was our ancestral past, you significantly increase the accuracy of forecasting that human behavior, which by extension is how you forecast the economy. So a human being is an economic agent. What is that human being wired to do? And some of these things, although it will sound sexist and maybe even borderline misogynistic, what they really are is they're ingrained in us. So what I did was a deep dive for 17 years on studying evolutionary theory and its application for marketing and growth in private businesses. So understanding the differences between men and women is a key to understanding human nature. Denying it kind of falls into our tendency to want to play let me back up. It's our tendency to want to blue lie. So like we all know what white lies are. Like you tell me I look good in this shirt when I don't because you're my buddy. Friendship was really important in our ancestral past. So important it was in effect social insurance. Like the best place to store meat that would spoil in our ancestral past was in your friend's stomach. So because then they'd owe you the favor in return. Because after a certain level of skill, hunting is really a product of luck. So is fishing. So if you're not such a great hunter in our ancestral past, but you got lucky and let's say I brought down an elk or whatever, the best place for me to store that is in the best hunters' stomachs, because they're going to be the ones who are most likely to get lucky that way and therefore share that bounty with me in return. We even do it today. When we have like a potluck dinner or like a feast with our relatives or friends, we're keeping mental notes in our mind about who repays that favor. And if they don't consistently repay that favor, they're no longer friends. So how that shows up in politics and the political divide we have is in tribalism. So if it makes sense for me to deny some type of scientific discovery because I'm showcasing loyalty to my in-group. It's called blue lies because it comes from a study of police in New York City in the 70s, that the bad police weren't ratted on by the good police because the good police perceived silence as loyalty to the police department. So it's now called blue lies. So if you're putting your pronouns into your social media, that's a blue lie. If you've got a giant Trump flag off the back of your pickup truck, that's a blue lie. None of that is about truth. It's all about, I have to believe lies to prove loyalty. Well, the pernicious part of that is the wackier the lie, the wackier the belief in the wackier lie produces more loyalty. So we have this state of stupidity that is riddled in our society to the point where it's almost laughable. And by the way, IQ and academic achievement do not solve for this. A massive study done by David Perkins over the last 30 years at Harvard He recognized that the higher the IQ, the more the advanced academic degree, we don't become better seekers of truth. We become better at articulating really stupid ideas. So what happens is it takes truly brilliant people to believe ridiculously stupid ideas. We want to not be guilty of that. So what we want to do is recognize we do not have a left-right dichotomy. We have a horseshoe of authoritarianism, meaning that there is brilliance in the doctrine of the right. There's also stupidity in it. There's brilliance in the doctrine of the left. There's also stupidity in it. So what we really want to do is cherry pick the right, cherry pick the left. It's called the center. And who do you know that is a centrist that can actually scale online? So what we're doing is giving a bullhorn to the biggest idiots in the United States. What we need to do is to quiet that down in our environment and source our information from better places. It is the reason why we're being lied to regularly. So what I want to do is I want to minimize the ability for other people to lie to me. And I want to understand it more about why people fall victim to this so we can sell more stuff to more people.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, you started the conversation with identifying a macro trend and how a business leader solved for it. Could you step us back? There was so much in what you just shared. I want to unpack it a little bit.
Sure.
So meta trends, can you just give an overarching, kind of definition of what meta trends are? And then if you could draw some parallels similarly to what you did with the Martin store, I love that idea.
Well, I like that, Kathy, because that's actually something I'm working on in my presentation. Despite doing 1,000 of these, I still need to work on this because stuff that seems obvious to me is not obvious to other people. And am I as clear as I can be? I've been euphemistically accused of being an extemporaneous thinker. So I think that means that I have ADD. But the deal is though, so connecting it all back. So what I do in my presentation is I teach CEOs and C-levels of private middle market companies what are meta trends, and then how it all ties back to increasing the overall valuation of your company. Right. So how do we increase the durability and sustainability of the revenue stream? Part of it is by not believing lies. So part of that means is like, okay, where can we source information? So what is a meta trend is a metamorphic trend. These are trends that have the capability of changing the future. If we understand what they are, well, then what happens is we don't fall victim to it. So the first thing we need to recognize is Fox News and MSNBC have to lie to us. So they cannot afford to tell us the truth because the truth is boring and complicated. So when people come up to me with very, very strong political convictions, I question their IQ. Because if you're truly studying something as best you possibly can, you recognize the truth is boring and complicated. So in my presentation, I bore the hell out of people. I teach them just how boring human beings really are. Those are meta trends. Those are trends that are so big, they're transformational to business, but they're not going to change anytime soon. And some of it is alarming. So the first thing we have to agree to is to be unoffendable. This is the first of the tips that I have for people. If you're unoffendable, you're open to truth. If you're easily offended, you're an idiot and you're headed for a fall. And frankly, all those people you're helping them with their growth strategy, you add up the average. Now, I've been studying the private middle markets for 17 years now. I have what I would argue is the largest study of private middle market CEOs probably in the world. I beat Ohio State at their own game. I beat Vistage at their own game. And I combined their studies with my studies. So just to kind of understand what's normal in this very abnormal world. So the first thing we need to do is recognize if you're unoffendable, you're open to truth. So, and then recognize, okay, human beings are really quite boring. Now, the dilemma of that is we don't want to think that about ourselves. We want to think we're sexy and unique when we're actually really boring. Like, so suffice to say, the day we buy a minivan, is the day even our car insurance company knows we don't look good naked anymore. It's kind of that's how life goes. So as we pursue Darwinian meta drives or biological imperatives that were important to our ancestral past and have a holdover effect to us today, that affects how we spend our money. Like, I'll give you an example. If you take your significant other, assuming you're heterosexual, your significant other is likely taller than you are. And the reason why is because heterosexual women prefer men to be at least 4 inches taller than they are. Now, women, and especially modern women, do a lot of settling, right? So I think all the guys who are listening right now are thankful for that point, because guys are far less than what we pretend to be in front of women. So women and men are lying to each other so often that you can tell when a man is lying to you because his lips are moving. You can tell when a woman is lying to you because her lips are moving. We just lie differently. So does that make sense? So you can actually study dating apps for to see which sex lies about what. So what do you think men lie about on dating apps the most?
No, I have no idea. I've never been on a date. Well, only for friends. I miss that whole thing.
Yeah, me too. But the deal is that you can still study what they lie about. Great books on the subject too, like Seth Stevens Davidowitz is someone to put on a radar screen. He wrote the book Everybody Lies, and then he wrote the book Don't Trust Your Gut. Some of the stuff is absolutely hilarious. So men lie on dating apps about their height and how much money they make. So that's actually a hidden way to know what's important to the opposite sex. So women don't judge men based on physical appearance as much. They judge them based on height and how much money they make. In other words, what resources could the man bring to the conversation, to the relationship, that makes him more desirable than other men who are vying to be her suitor. In the case of women, women lie about their age and their weight. In fact, the funniest study I've ever heard was a study done of women with handsome doctors. So, and it depended a bit on age, but what the women didn't know was their hospital bed was sitting on an industrial scale. So the doctor could see how much the woman weighed. And then what happened was, but when they were asked how much they weigh, proportional to how attractive the male doctor was, assuming the woman was heterosexual, how much weight do you think the woman lied about on average?
10, 12 pounds.
26 pounds.
Wow.
So the deal is that meant that the women were under medicated. So another example is you take a picture of, let's say, your significant other, and put him in, assuming I'm making some assumptions about you and your significant other, but the idea is, let's assume it's a heterosexual relationship. You take your significant other and put him in a Ford, and then you take about, women's memories are significantly better than men's. It makes sense because women are significantly more valuable to the species than men are. Right? So men are superfluous. We're kind of meant to die in protection of and provision of the next generation. So that, like in our ancestral past, it was really common for men to die. So often we actually descend from more women than we do men, if that makes sense. So part of it is you take a man, even today, and you take the man and put him in a Ford. There has to be 1,800 other pictures of other dudes in other cars in order to fool the memory of the female participant in the study, because you can't tell people what you're actually studying in a psychological study. You have to lie to them because we're aspirational about our own virtue. So you lie to them about, this is what we're studying, height in males. And then what happens, so that you have the women estimating how tall the guy is in a Ford. And then you have the same picture of that man buried 1,800 pictures deep. The one variation in that is the second picture is the man is sitting in a Bentley. How much taller do you think women estimate the man in the Bentley versus the man in the Ford?
A lot.
6 inches. So the deal is like, so status conveys sexual attractiveness, but only in heterosexual males. So what that does, that sends a message to men to seek status. Same thing happens if they have initials after their name, like VIP, DDS, MD, CEO. They don't even have to make logical sense. The actual initials could be LMNOPJ. So the same guy is estimated with initials after his name as 2 inches taller than the same man with no initials after his name. So
I feel like you're tipping on the different types of meta trends, because you're talking about age and perception, and like what are beyond those types of data points? What are other types of meta trends?
Well, there's also things about geopolitical stability, and the CIA utilizes human nature as a tool to predict violence in the world. So you could do right now, your listeners could actually, or your viewers could Google the CIA World Fact Book, and it will spit up all sorts of demographic charts on each of the countries in the world. This actually came from a fairly innocent conversation with a CIA analyst with a CEO in Vistage. The CIA knew the CIA analyst, called him up and said, look, my kid's doing like what do you call that when you study abroad? Well, study abroad. Right. So the kid's doing a study abroad. Do I have anything to worry about? So instantly the analyst pulled up the demographics of the country and said, no, you don't have anything to worry about. If tell them not to go to this country, and this country. And the reason why is because crime, violence, drugs, cartels, kidnappings correlate to 19-year-old males. Males are significantly more violent than females and commit significantly higher levels of crime. So a third world nation that's riddled with 19-year-olds is going to be a dangerous place to be. So if you're in like a Western democracy where the majority age is 50, well, then you don't have to worry because the people have too much to lose to commit crimes. So what ends up happening is you can tell which one of the countries you're more likely to get violent crimes in, or violent revolutions in the case of the CIA studying, where do we have to worry about for the future? So there's a direct correlation to that. In fact, there's a phenomenal book called The Female Brain written by Luann Brizendine. She's the lead researcher in the world on studying the differences between men and women. Specifically in the brain structure and the chemical makeup of it is, and there's significant differences. And this does not bode well for dudes, by the way. So picture at 8 weeks of gestation, the fetus that will become male. If you have a Y chromosome, you get hit with a wave of testosterone at 8 weeks. It kills off sections of our memory and our emotions, significantly inflating the male brain for violence, action, aggression, and a couple other things that are kind of obvious about dudes. So what ends up happening there is you get the second wave at 2 months old, and then the third wave comes between the junior year and senior year of high school. Like I myself, I was 5'4" until June of my junior year. I grew 6 inches in 2 months. That's the evidence of testosterone. So, and this does not bode well for dudes, by the way, because frankly, if we look at it through the lens of our ancestral past, you don't want the thing that you need to go hunt down Bambi's mother and kill it to feed the village. You don't want it being that much in touch with its feelings. And if it has to go on a hunt for a mastodon, you don't want it to have a good memory. You don't want it to remember the bad, because then it won't go on the hunt. So you want the guy to be a little bit on the stupid side. So this is the reason why women tend to, when they complain about heterosexual males, they tend to complain about them from a stupidity perspective. Why can't they see this? Why can't they see that? Because they weren't hardwired to see those things. If they were, then you might have died. And you guys are so much more important to the species than we are by a monumental margin. So, and this, sometimes, especially feminists get upset with me for bringing this stuff up. Like, how dare you say there's such a thing as biology or what have you? But the real deal is you want to understand it because, frankly, women are selling themselves short to be treated with equality. No, you want to be treated better. So, because when you actually study things about men, you don't really want to do the things that they want to do. Like, let me ask you, when's the last time you saw a female roofer?
Well, I don't think I've ever seen a female roofer.
How about a female garbage man?
I wouldn't know, but I definitely am seeing a lot more females in manufacturing. So I want to kind of rein you in a little bit here. You're talking about a lot of different data points. I think the context we're trying to drive to is that these pieces of information have real value in organizational leadership. And how do we take this vast amount of information that historically is out there about economies, about marketplaces, and really bring them back to useful tools in terms of how we think about our business. I know, demographics play a huge role on market focus. And so I'd love you to sort of take us down a notch and start to draw some parallels for how this really builds valuation in an organization's business.
Okay, so how about I do this? How about I give you a case study in Chicago, like right in your neck of the woods?
All right.
So a woman approaches me. She's 70 years old, doesn't ever want to retire, hears me speak, and then says, how can you help us? I said, so first thing we do is a diagnostic to see how strong the business is. It's doing 65 million in revenue. It's worth 12.8 million as we speak. Could be worth 20. So what's wrong with it? It's a classic things wrong. The number one thing wrong for private middle market companies is sales and marketing. They absolutely stink at it. It's kind of their blind spot. So my role is to figure out, is it sales or is it marketing? So, and then what is their go-to-market strategy? So I think maybe you and I can work together on a bunch of these case studies, because I have too much business at this point. So I need to farm a lot of that type of stuff out for specialists who can help me in those areas. But in their case, the mistake she's making is she thinks she's a logistics company that has a technology arm. No, she's a technology company that happens to be in logistics. As soon as you make that philosophical distinction, the valuation goes from 12.8 million to 130 million. So now I'm not going to say this is going to be easy. It's going to require a rebranding and a philosophical change at the company, but we need to get them to stop charging for their technology on a project basis and do it on a subscription basis. That's a meta trend. The reason why is because if you do things on transaction, they trade for a multiple of EBITDA. If you do things on subscription, they trade for a multiple of revenue. I don't know how good you are at math, but for some of your viewers here, that can be 1,000 to 2,000% increase in overall valuation. So, and my role is actually, how do we improve the organizational excellence of the company so that they are worth more? And then whatever it is that they want to do, they get to do. They get to optimize the Fabergé egg that they built in this business. Now, in her case, this might be too much detail for your guys, but in her case, she never wants to sell. I said, okay, no problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure the next generation can handle it. And she does have a couple of questions about that. So what we could do is build a private advisory board around the daughter in this case to make sure she can take over. And people who have been there and done that, like I've got a brother team that I refer a lot of business to. Between the two of them, they've run 71 companies, 11 of which that are publicly traded, and they never want to do that ever again. They much rather just help the next generation do that type of stuff, because they don't have to deal with the hassles of a publicly traded world. So so we can shore her up. Sure.
Okay, so let me break down what I just heard. I love the idea of the analysis. So can you talk a little bit about some of the things that are asked in that, that baseline analysis of that case study that you just shared?
All right. So the shallow dive would be 18 questions. Like, okay, how strong are you on legal? How strong are you in customer satisfaction? How strong are you on sales and marketing? How strong are you? Like, what's the potential market look like? Do you have recurring revenue? Don't you? And frankly, private equity is obsessed with recurring revenue, because we go to sell our companies based on our past performance. No, what they want to do is they buy a company based on future performance. So how do you reassure the acquirer the revenue stream will continue without you? Your CRM has to be rock solid. What I recommend for people to do is preemptive due diligence, because due diligence can be really quite expensive for private equity. In fact, I don't recommend that they do due diligence right away. I recommend they do an analysis of the CRM to see how strong the sales force is, how much knowledge is there, that type of thing. It's called a CRM audit. That costs only like 10 grand, Right. Private equity is like, what do you call it? Due diligence for private equity can give me 600,000. So what I'm doing is recommending to private equity that I coach is don't rush to do due diligence. Do it on the cheap first. Then once you know, hey, they've got these 18 value drivers in the right place, what I do is I put them through my software that actually asks them, depending on, are we doing a deep dive or a shallow dive? And a shallow dive, it's only 18 questions and it costs next to nothing. The deep dive is a little bit more involved. It takes 2 hours. It's 188 questions. It's more like an MRI for your company. In other words, how strong are you in the moment? The reason why it makes sense to do that is you don't want to find out you've got deficiencies in due diligence.
Right.
Because if it's too many, you're not going to pass. And then that company is gone, never to come back, because they've now pigeonholed you into a waste of their time. What I argue is we need to take strategic planning to the next level. What we need to do is actually, in our strategic planning, is do preemptive due diligence. Like, what would an outside investor think? Part of it is I got to get the people to think like investors, because investors pay the most for businesses, but they don't buy businesses. They buy investments. So what is it about your building is right and what's wrong? Then I recommend don't go looking for logic and reason in a place that doesn't exist. What we got to do is sit back and say, all right, how strong are we? Will we pass due diligence? So back to the case study of the woman in Chicago, where she's making the mistake is she thinks she's a logistics company with a technology arm. And then buried inside that technology is what she doesn't understand is logistics is a leading indicator to the economy and the stock market. So if we take 12 months to prove that she has empirical research, which I know she does, then this is the iffy part. Can we correlate some type of forecasting ability within that data set to forecast the stock market and the economy? We could sell that to Wall Street for billions. So what we're talking about here is taking a $12.8 million company and making it worth billions just with some subtle changes in understanding meta trends and how it affects our valuation.
And I would even, add maybe on a lesser, broad scale. I love that because I think that's the type of work that gets me really excited is to really lean in, to a space where there's a lot of vanilla ice cream and be that, unique, find that kind of diamond in the rough opportunity to take a business in a different direction with their positioning, with their market opportunity based on some data and insights. And I think you pointed to something within her data that, came clear to me is that if it's a leading indicator that we're looking at in terms of kind of customer information around logistics, you may even be able to pinpoint, food manufacturing. We're moving a lot of food, maybe, and we're starting to move food across geographies. Like, what are those types of insights? How do we make that impact the markets that we go after in terms of our market expansion or geographical expansion plan?
Well, well said. So back to meta trends and how these things affected. I'm former Wall Street. So what happens is we could not wait around for economic reports. There's a mistake we make when we listen to economists. We think they're soothsayers of the future, and really what they are is historians of past economies. And that's not without value. It has value, which is not the value we're looking for. So what I had to do is recognize, well, can you think of any economy in the world that's more addicted to its own consumer spending than ours? Like, don't rack your brain too hard. There's none. So that's the reason why we have trade deficits with everybody in the world. So what ends up happening is if we could track shipping, specifically back in those days, I used to watch very closely FedEx and UPS. Something happened to them that gave us some type of warning about corporate earnings for every other one. Because what we really want to know is what is our relationship to the economy? How soon does the economy start down and then our industry starts down? How soon does it reverse itself and then we start to reverse ourselves? The leading indicators in the economy are trucking, manpower, pallet, and packaging. So what happens is if we can get those into peer advisory boards or surround ourselves or do what I do, give me a freaking cell phone number and take phone calls at 4:00 in the morning when they're nervous, become their friend. Help them out. It ends their isolation, but also gives us a predictive quality of the economy. Then we got to know, like, okay, what's our relationship to it? Are we 1 month removed? Are we 36 months removed? And there's a couple of things out there, like there's these things called CEO confidence indexes. They're okay, but they could be great. And the part where they could be great is if they focused on the leading indicators. They send these CEO confidence indexes, surveys to contractors who have contracts that go out 3 years. That's a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator. So what we want to do is study the leading indicators, keep them in our orbit, and then know how far back are we from that. Because you can't use FedEx and UPS anymore. That's just evidence that Amazon's kicking the hell out of Macy's. Well, I ain't going to slow down anytime soon. That's probably going to pick up in the next downturn. So that's potentially a false positive on the threat assessors. What we really want is to surround ourselves with people who can give us some type of seismic warning. And then what we do is keep them upstairs when they start to turn south as a reward for them sharing that nervousness back with us. And then what happens, that helps us keep our finger on the pulse of the economy. In the case of the logistics company in Chicago, well, they could actually provide that for the Goldman Sachs of the world or the Merrill Lynch's of the world. And I'm not so sure the Merrill Lynch's of the world and the Goldman Sachs know what I just told you. So I know Warren Buffett does, because what Warren Buffett does is he'll actually buy companies just for their intel to how to protect his other investments. That's a smart dude right there. So the idea here is, like, what I want to do is surround each of the private middle market companies with as much seismic warning as possible, and then challenge them to stop being doers. So the biggest thing I see wrong that they do is they surrender strategy to the sales force, which is a gigantic mistake. Sales forces are not strategic. They're not visionaries. We have to coach that into them. Then the second thing I see that CEOs in the private middle markets do wrong is they're doers as opposed to working on the business. I believe my role is to get them out from the defensive mode. And I have a series of exercises I walk them through. I don't know we're going to have time to do that for today, but the deal is I'll walk them through some practical advice things. Because the downside of listening to somebody like me is it's very big picture stuff. It's how do you apply it? So one of the things I recommend is to go on a long vacation. Take with you a legal pad. And what you do is you're going on an uncomfortably long vacation. So if you normally go away for 2 weeks, go away for a month and see what your office is calling you about. And then write that down on a legal pad and take that back to some type of way of being held accountable. What you want to do is you want to be taken out to the woodshed and slapped around out of love so you never tolerate that from ever happening again. You need to make the company need you for nothing. Because the first thing we're looking for in due diligence is what's the dependency upon you. And if whatever's on that sheet of paper is direct evidence that your company's worth nothing. So what happens is that's the first step. Then we figure out a delegation process. That's the second exercise I have. I have a third one too to figure out why the CEO gets out of bed in the morning, permeate the business with that. Now they're actually being rewarded spiritually for commerce, which tends to get a bad rap, especially in academia. But the idea now is what happens is we've gotten them out of defense. Now we go on offense. This is probably the most important thing that we're discussing on this call right now. More companies will change hands in the next 15 years than ever before in American history. It is a massive opportunity for someone with less gray hair than me. So the idea is if you have less gray hair than me, you're going to be able to help these people retire by buying their companies as an asset purchase. Then what you're doing is selling yours as a stock. So now what happens is you go from a valuation of to a valuation of The difference between those two is the arbitrage for working on the businesses instead of in it.
Yeah, I feel like that thinking about a business as an asset, I don't feel like that's something that all middle market organizations do or leaders do. And then really identifying those like gaps to valuation, whether you're planning to sell now or 10 years from now or 2 years from now, just making sure that you know what those gaps are and you're leaning into, surfacing strategies to move forward from them. In terms of what you're seeing on the horizon, besides sort of the leading indicators from logistics companies and some of the other palleting, or like all transportation seems like those are the hot buttons to really be having on your radar. What markets do you feel are opportune? Is there anything else out there that you feel like has great market opportunity?
Well, if you remember from my presentation when I work with your group, we run an exercise where we have them identify all the industries that thrive during rough time periods.
Sure.
So let me just point out the gorilla in the room. It's been 16 years since the last recession. A market cycle is 5 years long. So that means we are more than 3 times longer than we should have been for the next recession. So what that means is that's like living on the West Coast and you haven't had an earthquake in 25 years. It's time to buy the insurance. Living on the East Coast and you haven't had a hurricane in 25, time to buy the insurance. So the idea here is we need an insurance plan against recession. So part of that is like, so if I'm running a B2B like you guys are, just to use you as an example, first thing I'm looking at is what's the diversification of the clientele? Are we in all the marketplaces? Maybe what we should be doing is having the sales force target certain industries. So this way we even out the flow of revenue, because some industries are counter-cyclical to other industries. Then what we could do is actually study the leading indicators, that trucking, manpower, pallet, and packaging, and then lower our fees to them so they're more likely to respond on our surveys. It's kind of like we give you a discount if you respond. And then what happens is we create empirical research by having a certain amount of these leading indicator businesses and then offer that information back to our non-leading indicators for free. Now you're competing less on price on certain businesses. So this is what I recommend for banks to do, CPA firms, law firms, what have you. And you do it with all the caveats in there, like, hey, we're not economists, but this seems to be interesting information I think is going to better your ability to strategically plan. If you need our help, you let us know. That kind of a thing. So it becomes kind of like a newsletter. And then what ends up happening is now you have the finger on the pulse of the economy. Then you know, okay, when the stock market's going to reverse, when the recession reverses, and then when that reverses. So it's kind of like once we're going down and then once we're going back up. There's some of the leading indicators are leading indicators on the way down. Some of them are leading indicators on the way back up.
Okay.
They're never both. So it's kind of like, how do you end their isolation, help them, but then help them help you help others? So
Right.
that would be an example of applications for what do you do with meta trends.
Okay. What about sort of near-term trends like tariffs and things that we've been hearing a lot about, and there's a lot of concern. How do we navigate those type of sort of?
Okay, so what happens here is this is where I'd be using colorful language if you and I were just having a private conversation. And the reason why is because you cannot predict unprecedented things. Like one I get asked all the time is, well, what about all the debt we have? You could have asked that question of unprecedented debt levels every single second of every single day for the last 50 years. It's just how it is. So Nixon took us off the gold standard and made us fiat currency. Now, that was actually the right thing to do then. But the downside is that you're supposed to be exercising what's called Keynesian economics, which is you don't print money like it's going out of style in the good days. You only print it in the bad days. Well, that would wouldn't prevent recessions, but it would quicken them, and it would prevent depressions. So the idea here is that the fact that we're printing money like it's going out of style, and one of the biggest lies you've ever heard is the Republican Party wants smaller government. Nope. They want different, bigger government. What they really want is both those parties want access to the purse strings. So when you talk about things like tariffs, one of the things I think that's truly brilliant about Donald Trump is he recognizes when he comes off as a maverick, an uncontrolled maniac, every other country steps in line. They're afraid of what he might do because he's such a wackadoo. So it's like you can't predict what the guy's going to do. So what he does is he saber rattles for economic purposes. Like I was just speaking in Toronto, and they were a little annoyed at me because I was American. So the deal is, and they don't trust Donald Trump, and you shouldn't. So the idea here is that's part of the genius of his ability to negotiate. So there's a whole slew of things out there that I would sit back and tell you, okay, in a future book I will. What's the policy of America first? Do we really need to be the police department anymore of the world? Da, 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 all those type of things. But trying to predict stuff on the short term is impossible. And that's the job of Fox News and MSNBC. And the reason, frankly, that they have to lie to us is because we're hardwired to pay attention to novel things, not truth. It did not benefit our ancestral past to understand truth. It benefited our ancestral past for us to lie about ourselves, to navigate our position within our in-group. You can actually study it vicariously through primate culture. They do the exact same things. They just can't communicate as well as we do. And they don't understand the dynamics as well as we do. We're the smartest animal on planet Earth, but yet when you study our behavior, we come across as one of the dumbest. So part of that is that we think we're seekers of truth, and no, we are seekers of any evidence that supports our preconceived conclusions. What we are is bad lawyers. We decide way too quickly which side of the argument we're on, then we seek only the first evidence that proves our side of the argument correct. This should be the great emancipator of mankind. What is it really? An idiotic echo chamber. It's a special type of stupid. So those are some of the things that you can count on. What you can't count on is what one person is going to do. This is the reason why you need to stop watching Fox News and MSNBC. Because I think if I was to put out a survey to each of the people that watch what you're doing here and ask them the question, is watching Fox News research? Is sitting down to watch Fox News with a scotch in your hand research? Every one of them, if they're honest, will say no. Same thing with MSNBC. They both lie. Their lies are just different. So I've had people say to me, oh, I get the truth. I said, okay, how do you do that? They said, well, I watch both MSNBC and Fox News. I'm like, okay, so their lies plus their lies equal the truth.
So is there a source of truth then in your?
Absolutely, but it's boring. So the deal is like, I know it for a fact because I had a radio show and we produced it and we had like no listeners because people don't want to hear the truth. They want to be lied to, and they want to be lied to the way they want to be lied to. And the idea is it's really quite annoying. So my argument is simply this. How many employees do you have, Kathy?
About 25.
Okay, so let's just say it's 25. So you got 25 people counting on you making excellent decisions, yes?
Yes.
All right, so how do you make better decisions is to recognize we're idiots. The critical finger has to point in the right direction. We are naturally stupid. So what we have to do is spend more time in investigation mode than we normally would. We jump to prosecution mode too quickly. This is the reason why when people are certain about their opinions, I question their IQ. When they're have really strong political convictions, I question their IQ. It's kind of like watching a tennis match and rooting for one side, and then but without a referee, and then everything you see that happens wrong to your side, and then you see everything that's happening as right. You cannot be honest about your own team. I know this for a fact because I'm a New York Jet fan. So the whole idea that I'm smart and you should listen to me just went out the freaking window. They have stunk. They have redefined suck for a football team for generations. Like there's one head coaching candidate right now that has more 12-win seasons than the entire Jets history, and they won't interview the guy. So the deal is like it's a clown show. It's a clown car. So when I watch the game, I'm looking at it from a perspective. I can't even separate myself out from this. I'm legendary for throwing remotes against the wall, and I know how all the psychological manipulation works, and it still works on me. So the idea here is what we want to do is spend more time in investigation mode, free ourselves from the day-to-day of the business, delegate all of that so we can concentrate on what the trends are, understand our customer base at a great level, because here's the real truth of all truths, Kathy. You have 25 people counting on you to make excellent decisions. Yeah? What if we add in their families? What if we add in the customers? What if we add in the vendors? What if we add in your customers' customers? How many people you got counting on you to make excellent decisions? So what we got to do is first, the practical thing is point the critical finger in the right direction, squarely at ourselves. Where am I about to be a freaking idiot again? So the idea here is how do we minimize that? That's the first of all the practical advice that I would implement in any business, because the meta trends are working against us.
Yeah, I feel it, it's sort of interesting. I felt one of the biggest aha moments, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, was around age and aging populations and sort of that shift of power. So you talked about, is the US even capable of, and should we be capable of being the superpower, so to speak, long term? Are we capable when we don't have the demographics, the younger kind of workforce coming into play? Is globalization going to be a opportunity for all organizations?
Well, there's a couple of people out there that would disagree with me, right? So that there are economists out there, and there's an author out there named Peter Zion. So he wrote the book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning. And he is spot on accurate in virtually everything except for one thing in his book. What he argues is we're experiencing population collapse. Like, this is one of the questions I want to ask climate scientists, because you can't sit back and look at anthropogenic global warming and deny it. It exists. But is it going to be as bad as people claim it's going to be? And the reason why is because we suffer from flatline projecting. So the argument that I have is we're going to experience, let me just put this in perspective. We're going to lose 700 million Chinese people in the next 20 years because they're going to die of natural causes. That means they're going to have their population. It's even worse in South Korea. It's worse in Taiwan. It's almost as bad in Russia. Russia's going to lose 100 million people. That's more than half their population. So are they really the threat they're being painted out to be? One of the first things we need to do is stop listening to journalists. Do not have your news curated for you. Go to the source of information. They're called PhDs. I would start with Steven Pinker. So Steven Pinker is probably the smartest man alive today. He's written 13 bestsellers. I haven't just read his books. I've read one of his books 7 times, and I've rewritten it longhand pen 5 times. That's how juicy that book is. It's called How the Mind Works. If you read that book and really understand it, you'll understand yourself better, your spouse better, your kids better, your employees better, and your customers better. You'll be able to sell more stuff to more people. So then we sit back and go, okay, is America really the superpower? Should it be? So this came from a conversation that I had vicariously through my son's friend. My son, who actually helped me write my first 2 books, by the way, went into college as a published author. So he's a history major. Boy, can he debate. Like, he loves to just sit down and just hammer me with everything he possibly can. And then we come out with better solutions as a result, because I don't take him at face value. He doesn't take me at face value. It's freaking awesome. But one of his friends said, well, Scandinavian socialism is better than American capitalism. I said, well, he has a problem. He has the problem of the Navy. And he said, what do you mean? I said, you're comparing apples to oranges. We're their Navy. We control every trade route in the world. If we pulled the Navy back just to the United States waters, you would see a 20% depression in virtually every country in the world except for a handful. Us, Canada, Mexico, what have you. And we wouldn't really be negatively affected by it. In fact, we'd be positively affected by it. So the real question is, should we still be the police of the world? So in my most recent book, it's called You're Gonna Die Unless You Buy This Book. I have 4 chapters dedicated to geopolitical stability based on demographics. So we have this gigantic population collapse. Is it going to collapse here? The answer is no. And the reason why is because if someone in your orbit complains about the United States or says terrible things about it, it means they're historically ignorant and they're statistically illiterate. These are not people you want to listen to. These are people you want to challenge, but maybe politely, especially if they're related to you over Thanksgiving dinner. So what happens is that we're going to see population collapse in all these other countries, which means we're not going to lose credibility with the U.S. currency. They'll be too busy losing the faith in their own currency. Kind of makes us the leper with the most fingers. How about that? Then what you do is you look at how do people vote when they don't live in the country that they're moving to. They vote with their feet. Where do they want to go? Everybody wants to come here. So, oh yeah, every place else is better. No, we're comparing us to perfection in your mind. Who the hell do you think you are? What you really have to do is sit back and look at what do people do when they vote with their feet. They come here. So I don't believe that we're going to be negatively affected by this. The real question is, I know someone's going to come out with this. Now, I'm not necessarily saying I'm a proponent of it. I'm saying I want to analyze it in a future book so I can see, okay, where would the shortcomings come from? What if we just pulled in the Navy? Maybe sold it to the other countries. What we do is we pull back and we don't control every trade route anymore. Do we really need to still do so? The dilemma I'm running into is that when I turn to CIA analysts about this, they're hardwired to continue the status quo. So are almost every proponent that you've ever listened to. Every talking head wants the same. How do we stay the same? I'm sitting back going, well, what if you just said, do we really need to do that anymore? And then analyze what would be the negative. How soon would we be independent from every single source of production everywhere else in the world? A week, 6 months? And then how much money would that save us? Because what we are doing right now, Kathy, is we are spending money as a country as if we don't love our grandchildren. So my son, back to the question is, should we still do this anymore? I'm not so sure, but I'm willing to go down a rabbit hole with anybody who wants to debate me on this, because I want to know, like, what is some element that we don't have in the United States or in, let's say, North America? Because if we pulled back our Navy and just protected our own waters, Mexico and Canada would be safe. And we could just create our own trade front and forget the rest of the world. Let them beat the hell out of each other on other things and stop hating us, because we're not going to be interfering with them anymore. So what would be the negative? Would it be like a negative for the CIA? Well, is that a negative for us? Would it be a negative for us economically? I'm not so sure. And I'm willing to have a conversation. I'm not saying I know. I'm saying I'm starting that analysis next. But when I look at it and say, okay, can anyone stand up to our Navy? The answer is hell to the no. Like Jerry Jones has a bigger aircraft carrier than virtually every other Navy in the world. He has more aircraft on his one boat in the Caribbean than the majority of all the navies of the rest of the countries in the world, except for us. We have enough firepower in one fleet carrier. One of our fleet carriers can be parked off at any country in the world and level their capital within weeks. That's how much ordnance is in these fleet carrier groups. We could dismantle other governments through what would you call it, brutality, like that. And we have 11 such carrier groups. There are only 11 in the world. That means we could actually simultaneously run 11 wars and win.
Wow.
Do we really need to be that strong? So the deal is, I'm not so sure. So am I worried about other countries? Am I worried about, China invading Taiwan? No. So I'm more worried about China buying Taiwan. So because the rumor has it that they already own 35% of the Taiwanese parliament. I can see something like that happening. So part of this is how do you take the meta trends and start to analyze them from a geopolitical stability perspective, then analyze them from a customer perspective, then analyze them from your own company perspective. And then lastly, it's how can we improve the organizational excellence of the company, significantly improving not only the valuation, but the durability and sustainability of the revenue stream. It's frankly, I would argue, your way and my way of leaving the American economy better off for having existed. So
Wow.
if you're ever standing over my grave, I want my headstone to read, he helped the few protect the many. That's the position that you're in. That's the position that your audience is in. Do they understand that? Can they articulate that on some level that frankly, where they're kicking so much ass, their foot hurts? That's what I want. So and I had open heart surgery 2 years ago and I almost died. It was a genetic flaw to my heart. It wasn't like clogged arteries or anything like that. So, but I almost died. And now I am unbelievably motivated to write as many books as I possibly can because I recognize how short all of this really is for any one of us. How do we expand our views so that we leave the world a better place? And for some reason, that seems to be resonating with my audiences. That warms my heart.
Well, I know we're getting close to time, Mark. I figured this would be a very unique conversation. I think you've talked about so many things today. We probably could have gone on for a few hours. I so appreciate you being our guest and just giving us something to think about. I really value curiosity. I value learning new things, and I felt like what I heard from you at my Vistage group was impressive. So thank you so much. If anybody that has attended today's live stream would love to talk to Mark a little bit more, this is how you can get a hold of him. And please put business as unusual in the subject line so he knows that you came from our live stream today or on one of the reruns. Next up for us, I wanted to just, first of all, give a nod to our long-term partners and sponsors, M3 Learning and HR Source. We're really excited to have them again this year, and we'll be bringing them on to bring value to our audience. And then next up in February, it's going to be a completely different topic, but we're going to be right around spring training kickoff. So are you a baseball fan too, Mark?
Well, at this stage of my life, I can only be one sport fan, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, I am a long-term baseball fan, long-standing baseball fan, and a Cubs fan. And so, what we're going to talk to our attendees about is how Sloan Valve has really leveraged innovation in their growth strategy. So they have a 10-year partnership with the Cubs and have been able to bring a very unique product to the minds of the marketplace by positioning themselves with sports marketing. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about what it's like to run an almost 120-year-old organization. And we'll talk a little bit about their approach to globalization. I'm really excited to have Kirk Allen, one of the family owners of Sloan Valve, be our guest on February 13th. So be sure to join us for that conversation. And with that, thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciated all of the really interesting, thought-provoking information you brought to our audience today. And I hope, people took away some ideas and innovative approaches to thinking about their business and building valuation in their organization. If you've got any questions about how to integrate innovative thinking in your growth plan, feel free to reach out to any of us at Red Caffeine. And with that, we'll close out and say continue to bring the unusual. Thanks again, Mark, for being our guest.
That's awesome. If I could extend an invitation for you to be on my podcast too. It's Metatrends in the Next Economy.
I would love it. Thank you.
Thanks so much.